So now that we have the Docker Community Edition up and running on our Windows 10 virtual machine here, we can start having a little bit play around with some of the features and get some scripts run in order to make things happen. So just before we do jump into any of the scripts, I just want to run through some of the options that you have and the settings that you need to make once you've installed this, just to make things a little bit smoother. So down in the sys tray down here, you'll see that we have various different options that you can look at. Obviously, if you want to find a bit more about Docker itself, uh, the settings, if you want to do any updates, you can sign into your own repository if you want to sort of go and have a look at some of the things that you've got in there in a visual or graphical way. So we click on repositories here, we will see this is my repository that I have up on the Docker Hub SQL repository. But the thing that I really want to show you most of all with this is the settings side of it. So if we go and have a look at that, there's a lot of things in here you can go around and you can have a bit play around with. But the the main ones for me is essentially your shared drives and in here in advanced. During this session, we're not going to talk so much about networks, proxies, anything like that. So we'll leave them out for now. If you click into shared drives, it will pick up the fact that there is actually only one drive available on this machine. And why you would look at sharing a drive, we'll get into some of the demos a bit later, but essentially if you want to be able to transfer files from one or from your host machine into your Docker container, one of the ways you can do it is by mounting a volume into the container itself. And in order to do that, you're going to have to share the drives. If you don't have your firewall settings set up correctly, or configured correctly, then this menu here will be very different and you won't have the options of the likes of the shared drive. So probably the most important port to be looking at is the likes of 445. If you look on the web, it'll say about enabling printer and sharing, and that in itself will essentially it opens up port 445. So as long as you have that open, you'll be able to see same options as what I'm seeing here. Now, this is probably the most important one of all. In here, you can configure how many CPUs you want as standard, how much memory you want to be allocating to Docker, swap files, etc., etc. But in here, one thing I want to point out more so than anything else is this one, the memory value. In order for you to be running Linux based or SQL Server on Linux containers, you need to set this at a minimum of 3250 megabytes. If you don't, your containers just won't start. Now, in the early days, you never used to get an error message telling you that. It took quite a bit of investigation work to work out why exactly that was. But certainly, as long as you follow my advice and make sure that you do set it to 3250. It is in the Docker documentation as well. Easy to miss, but hopefully, as long as you follow it and you set it, you shouldn't have any issues. So now we have that. So we've got our VM, we've got Docker installed, we've got our settings set. What can we do now? Well, what we want to check, or one of the things that we could check, is to make sure that everything is up and running as it should be. And we can have a look at what version of Docker we're actually running here. So if we run the script Docker version, what you'll find with all Docker commands, pretty much every Docker command that you will run, certainly from the likes of VS Code, and you'll see in this demo, everything begins with Docker. It's Docker this, Docker that. Kind of keeps things simple, so you always know what exactly you're running. So if we run Docker version, we will see in here, it will show us both the client and the server version itself. And you can see in here, it's saying that the operating system itself, Windows, but the Docker daemon that we're running is Linux. So that means that we're going to be running Linux-based containers. Because the beauty of the Docker, Docker on Windows Community Edition, certainly, the chip for the free one, is being able to run both Linux and Windows-based. If you're running on Windows Server 2016, you've got the option of Windows-based containers, and that's it. You don't have the Linux ones. So the beauty of this is that we have the ability to swap between them. So again, you've got Docker version. We can have a look at some more of the information that's available within it. So as we saw before, you have your number of CPUs, the memory. We can see here Docker for Windows, operating system type, Linux. There's a lot of information in there that you can have a look at. Another interesting one which might come in useful when you've got a lot of things running is your number of containers that you have running, how many paused, stopped, and how many Docker images you actually have in your repository at any one time. So I mentioned briefly before about how at the moment we're running the Docker daemon in, I'll call it Linux mode. We can run a very simple script here which will allow us to swap into Windows. So hopefully after a couple of seconds, there we go. We will see now that that has completed, and it should in theory have changed to Windows. So if we again do a Docker info, have a look at that, scroll back up to the OS type, zoom back in there, we can see that this has indeed changed to Windows. So it's a very useful sort of one-line tool there that's quite easy to run, which will allow you to swap between Windows and Linux-based containers. You can't run either or them both at the same time. Another way you can do this is to go back into the sys tray here, and you will see you do have the option to switch to Windows containers. Now that essentially does exactly the same thing. It just seems to be a little bit slower in doing so. So what can we do now? We'll just sort of clear down the host a little bit so we can have a clearer screen. Now Docker, the registry, the Docker hub itself has tens of thousands of images, and before you can actually run a container, you're going to need an image pulled down from this registry into your local repository. And how we go about doing that is, first of all, unless you know specifically the name of the image that you're looking for, which some of them can be quite difficult to memorize exactly what they are, you're going to want to do a search for them. So again, another very simple script. You can see here we've got Docker again, but we're going to search, and this is what we're going to search for. I'm just going to search for an image called BusyBox, and essentially it's just a toolkit, nothing too exciting. It's a Linux-based toolkit, relatively small, probably one of the smallest images I think that is in the registry itself, the Docker hub. So if we need to pull it down, it shouldn't take too long. I think it's only a couple of meg. So if we run that, you will see here that we get this output. And what this shows is the results of the search. So essentially, this is the image name. All of these are the different images, the names of what they've been given. A little description, as you will see in this one here, it looks like it's been chopped off a bit. Bit of a rating. We can see whether it's an official one. It's an automated build. So there's some very useful information in that. But what I mentioned with the thing being chopped off, how we can look at that is if I run that again, as you will see here now, the description, we've actually got the full description in there. So just a little parameter there that can prove useful. So now we've done a search, we know that there is an image called BusyBox. What are we going to do with that? Well, what we want to do is we want to pull that down from the registry. So script again, very, very straightforward. We're going to do Docker. Like I say, everything's going to be Docker. We're going to pull, and this is the image name. this is the image that we want to pull down. Now, when all the images will have a tag, sort of like a version tag. If you don't put a tag in it, in the script that you're running when you're trying to pull this down, it will default to the latest. There'll always be a latest, or should always be a latest. And you just got something to bear in mind if you are trying to pull down any images and you know there's multiple versions. If you don't, chances are you'll pull down the latest. So if we run that,